Hello and welcome to this month's webinar. For this month, we thought it might be helpful to recap the range of adaptations, both formal and regulatory ones, as well as those that might be better described as doing differently what's always been allowed. We've all become accustomed to having to react quickly to changing events over the last couple of years, and who knows what the next couple of months might bring. Just to remind everyone, we do conduct these webinars twice a month, on the second Thursday morning of each month and then on the fourth Wednesday afternoon of each month. And they are the same webinar, so they will be repeated. Also, here's our customary little nag or reminder about signing up for our email alerts if you haven't already done so. Even if you have signed up, it does no harm to check your preferences are up to date. Now on to this month's In Case You Missed It, from the wider Maths, English and ESOL landscape within England. Firstly, just to confirm, there was no last-minute reprieve, so the government has now reinstated the rule of requiring Level 2 apprentices to study towards and attempt Level 2 qualifications in Maths and English if they don't already have them. Level 2 apprenticeship standards still only require Maths and English achievement at Level 1, but IFATE and the ESFA will presumably now be restarting their checks that apprenticeship providers are complying with this rule. I say presumably because we as City and Guilds don't have any role in enforcing this rule. Secondly, you may have seen that the government has dropped the requirement on T-level students to achieve Maths and English GCSEs at grade 4 or above by the end of their programme if they haven't already done so. Instead, they'll be subject to the normal condition of funding requirements that apply to a full-time 16 to 19 study programmes. If you have any students already on T-level programmes, i.e. those that started in 2020 or 2021, then it's worth checking the guidance from the ESFA, as there are some dispensations for these learners, though they'll still be expected to work towards Level 2 qualifications if they haven't already got them. The condition of funding requirements will then apply in full to 2022 to 23 T-level starts. Finally, following on from the subject content document that was published by DfE last October, Ofqual is currently holding a technical consultation on regulatory arrangements for the digital functional skills qualifications. The qualifications covering Entry 3 and Level 1 are due to effectively replace functional skills ICT from August 2023. The technical consultation runs until the 27th of January. It's more about the proposed qualifications will be assessed and regulated rather than their content, as this is already set out in the subject content document. It's also important not to confuse these qualifications with the essential digital skills qualifications that have already been rolled out by a number of awarding organisations, and indeed we are working on our own qualifications to be launched later in the year. Okay, here's the section when we update you specifically on news from City and Guilds. We mentioned this was imminent last month, but pass rate data for functional skills exams from last year has now been published and can be found on the 4748 qualification documents page. It includes a detailed explanation about how we have calculated these pass rates. The reporting includes all externally marked functional skills assessment components attempted with City and Guilds during the 2020 to 2021 academic year, including the small number of results that were determined through the teacher assessed grades, or the TAGS process. We've broken the data down into two ways: by provider type, i.e. functional skills versus independent training provider versus adult community learning, as well as for each of these the proportion of first attempts that resulted in a pass. It is worth also saying that the government have not yet published any national benchmarks for the reformed functional skills qualifications due to the impact of COVID and CAGs and TAGs. Now on to the main topic for this month. We're going to focus on 4 areas ranging from the formal regulatory parameters that Ofqual and the government is allowing awarding organisations to apply this year, to changes we've incorporated into our exam, ICE document for functional skills to permanent changes that we've either introduced or clarified since the pandemic, to reiterating what's always been permitted even if it hasn't been your own normal practice. We are mindful that the next few weeks in particular are likely to be quite trying, and that the need to be able to react and respond quickly to changing events is likely to be a pressing concern for many. Firstly, let's cover the formal changes that we are currently able to apply as a result of the Vocational and Technical Qualifications Contingency Regulatory Framework, or VCRF. This sets out the government's expectations around how far they expect Ofqual and awarding organisations to deviate from normal assessment arrangements for any of what they categorise as vocational and technical qualifications, including functional skills, ESOL and other qualifications that sit outside the traditional A-levels and GCSE landscape. In the case of functional skills and ESOL, the 2021-22 version of VCRF is what effectively gives us permission to facilitate things like remote invigilation, to relax some of the more stringent conditions around moving dates, times of functional skills exams that we introduced as part of the 2019 reforms. It also makes it possible for us to allow remote assessment for entry-level functional skills and for all the internally marked assessments within the ESOL Skills for Life suite. Do make sure you have had sight of the adaptation documents for whichever qualifications you're involved in delivering. This year's versions have a red cover and can be found on our COVID-19 microsite, so that's cityandgirls.com/COVID-19, or by following the link at the top of any page on the cityandgirls.com site. Now, in the case of functional skills, there are a number of specific points to note. Pretty much all of the formal adaptations relating to the externally marked components of functional skills English and functional skills mathematics have been incorporated into the instructions for conducting examinations, the ICE document. It's always important to ensure you're working from the latest version of this. The current one is version 1.4. A lot of the COVID adaptations confirmed in the ICE document are procedural. For example, it is no longer necessary to inform us of any date or time changes, and the ability to move individual paper-based candidates to a new time slot rather than the whole booking. Also things like other premises and social distancing when papers are being handed out and collected. Then there's our remote invigilation service, a more polished successor to the interim test at home approach that operated for a few months last year. Strictly speaking, this is also part of the adaptation arrangements, although the detailed guidance relating to this can be found on our specific remote invigilation webpage. Another point to bear in mind is that the ICE document only covers external assessments. There are a number of adaptations in place for entry level where internal assessment applies, most notably being able to complete and assess these remotely. They do still need to be completed under continuous supervision, so it's important to read the guidance in the adaptations guidance document carefully. One change we've made, partly to help facilitate this, is making most of the live assessment documents available as editable PDFs, so they can more easily be shared and completed electronically. Another thing to clarify regarding the speaking, listening and communicating component of functional skills English at all levels, the current assessor guidance documents for this includes details of how these assessments can be conducted remotely, since this falls outside the scope of COVID related adaptations and is permitted as a matter of course. However, please do read the guidance carefully and ensure your EQA is aware if you do plan to carry out any of your SEL speaking, listening, communicating discussions and presentations remotely. Before we move on, it might be worth quickly reiterating that candidates completing on-screen functional skills mathematics exams are now allowed to use a handheld calculator rather than having to use the inbuilt Evolve one. This isn't a COVID-related adaptation. This is a change to our guidance, although we have recently clarified that it also applies where candidates are being invigilated remotely using the remote invigilation service. There are some conditions around this, for example, a stricter candidate to invigilator ratio, and there's also some protocols to follow to manage the transition from the non-calculator to the calculator permitted sections of the paper. So it's important to read the relevant section of the functional skills instructions for conducting exams, so that's the ICE document, carefully. Whilst we're on the subject of functional skills, it's worth just quickly mentioning ICT. Do bear in mind that ICT was not part of the 2019 reforms, so is subject to slightly different regulatory conditions from those that apply to English and Maths. To find the assessment conduct requirements for ICT, you'll need to dig out the old 3748 qualification handbook. Nevertheless, there are a few further adaptations permitted. For example, being able to move individual candidates entered for paper assessments to a different time slot. However, please be aware that remote invigilation is not available for ICT assessments. It's not technically possible to facilitate this because of the way these assessments are designed, with candidates required to access in-app software. Finally, the arrangements for ESOL Skills for Life qualifications are largely the same as last year, at least from a regulatory point of view. That's apart from the government ruling out any kind of tag process for this year, just as they have also done for functional skills. The adaptations document for this year has been strengthened to include more practical guidance on conducting the assignments remotely, especially some suggestions for managing the reading and writing assessment activities, and of course most of the documents are now available as editable PDFs. Also worth noting, the remote invigilation service is able to accommodate the on-screen reading test for level 1 and level 2. Again, this is more a permanent solution that has replaced the temporary test at home arrangements that were in place for a while last year. If you're listening to this recording, please feel free to send in any of your questions or queries to the pre-employment@sittinggirls.com inbox, and we will be able to pick them up directly for you. And before we go, just a quick reminder about a special webinar that will be appearing again next month. We ran one this month. It will be a closer look at using a range of our digital learning resources and other tools that can support you with your learner journey. So it just remains to say thank you for joining us this month. We hope to see you next month in our webinar. Take care, everybody. Bye.